Thank you for making it back for day two. It's going to be just as exciting as day one. So we're here to talk about enterprise mobility, something I'm personally responsible for and passionate about. I'm Todd Schofield. I manage both technology innovation as well as enterprise mobility for Standard Chartered Bank. Standard Chartered, for those who aren't familiar, we are a British headquartered bank who is actually focused on Asia, Africa, and Middle East, which is where 90% of our revenue comes from. We actually have about 90,000 employees around the world in about 70 countries. So we are quite mobile and quite on the go. And let my colleagues introduce themselves.
So, working at VMware is an interesting company. I think a lot of people know who we are in this room, and we've grown so very, very quickly in a very short period of time. I like to say most companies go small, medium, large, and global. We went small, medium, and global and skipped over large. In fact, I was just reiterating some statistics to someone just recently where I've been at VMware a little over 7 years now. But 11 years ago, VMware was $50 million a year in revenue. And at the end of Q3 last year, we did close to $400 million in 72 hours. So going from 50 million a year to 400 million in 72 hours, you can imagine the explosive growth that we've gone through and the infrastructure and the processes that have been required to keep up with that growth. And of course, being in the forefront of technology and pioneering new ways of delivering technology services, we've also had the expectation of accelerated transformation internally. And of course, that leads to what we're doing with mobile and so on and so forth. We have a term which we call Mobile 360 at VMware, or End User Computing 360, I should say. We think about it in a number of different ways. Considerations and challenges. Obviously, we want to make sure that whatever we deploy has better user productivity. It lowers costs and improves support. We get improved security and easier compliance. So we want to make sure we have those four pillars at the forefront of when we make decisions around what we're going to be doing with mobility. It's interesting because there's been this sort of gold rush of bring your own device, bring your own mobile, and so on. But then the question is then what? You want to make sure that some of the challenges we look at is, and I think Roger, you mentioned it, you just don't want to take your stodgy old enterprise applications that were built in the Soviet era and transpose them over to a mobile device. So we think about things of, are we trying to solve enterprise application solutions or problems with the mobile device? Are we looking at micro apps? Are we looking at providing enterprise capability versus employee productivity? We find that there's a plethora of demand for employee productivity type capability versus maybe being able to do enterprise application type capability on your devices. Things around security. Obviously, keeping the enterprise secure is paramount, but at the same time, you have these sort of counter-competing challenges where security is normally make it harder for people to do things and provide guardrails and so on. And of course, makes it hard for the freedom of users to have a seamless experience. So how do you bring a seamless, go anywhere, mobile experience, but at the same time, keep your environment secure?
Claus Moldt, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Empath. We just started about 6 months ago. Before that, I was 7 years running the infrastructure for Salesforce, and before that, 4 years running the infrastructure for eBay. So I agree with what you said, Paul. I just don't define the new in terms of infrastructure that you have to support as the Soviet era. It's actually, the 10-year-old technology, similar to Salesforce, that doesn't necessarily support what you need to run today. And it's quite interesting to hear Roger, what he said about Verizon, how they're building it. We see the same thing. We actually see that all the enterprise customers are building either their own platform or is starting to look for a platform that'll be emerging to look where and how can they interact with that platform. And there's a ton of considerations that you have to do when you move into the mobile space. Obviously, the consumer space has been there forever. And you don't necessarily have to have all the same considerations in the consumer space that you have to have in the enterprise space. So when you think about it from a platform perspective, Paul mentioned a couple of things. He mentioned security. But you have to think about how do you distribute the applications? How do you map applications to users within the enterprise? What do you code in? Do you code in the native HTML5? There's a ton of emerging frameworks that you can use. how to get the performance, how do you think about offline and online, and then it's fundamentally a different way of thinking when you have the mobile device, because they're so much more powerful than the web-based. You have to think about how do you interact with everything that the mobile device can do, camera, the phone, image, GPS, et cetera, et cetera. So tons of consideration that has to go into how do you think about mobilizing your enterprise from a platform standpoint.
I'm Jatinder Singh. I'm Director of Mobile Innovation at PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. Some of you might associate PARC with Ethernet and the GUI back in the days. But we've been doing some of the breakthrough research recently in networking and mobile and big data space. PARC runs its own P&L, wholly owned subsidiary of Xerox, but we do custom R&D work with some of the biggest companies around here. So, with regard to mobility, since we live and breathe innovation, I couldn't help draw an analogy to an hourglass structure. It's become more prevalent. I mean, we've seen it in the TCP/IP stack, where you have a system which is exposing a lot of complexity, and then on top of that, there's an ecosystem of applications that are utilizing it. So whenever there is that duality or bifurcation, inevitably you need middleware, you need some kind of abstraction that lets users and the enterprise app developers utilize the functionality that the hardware is exposing. In general, when iOS and Android came in the picture, they were competing platforms. Since Apple and Google, they opened up a big market for development on the hardware side and also consumer as well as the enterprise apps. I think we've seen that proliferation happen. There's been heterogeneity. It is there to be embraced. But I think lately we've noticed more and more consolidation. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the tools which are prevalent in the market, and I think Claus alluded to them. There's a plethora of applications. jQuery Mobile provides some. IBM and SAP have solutions in that regard. The challenge and the question to my mind always is, once you have certain requirements for your enterprise apps, what boundaries can you draw around that? Is that a massively multiplayer online gaming application that you're trying to develop? Or is it like a healthcare app, which doesn't really require immense amount of capabilities from hardware and software? So defining that requirement for your application, I think that's the first criteria that you can then utilize to see which platform fits the best. Do you want to go native, or do you want to go the route of MADPs and the MIPS? Gartner, I think a couple of years ago, came up with this point about, rule of three. If you've got 3 different applications, you've got 3 different backend systems. So they help you outline what kind of platform are you trying to utilize. Raj's keynote resonated quite a bit. Before PARC, I used to run R&D for T-Mobile's parent company. So we saw firsthand how, this proliferation in data. The day G1s were launched in the market, there was a hockey stick, jump in traffic. So being able to manage that traffic, although it doesn't directly relate to the enterprise, but when they interact with their customer with regard to latency and quality of service, those kind of implications of how the networks are getting utilized, what is the backhaul cost, these become important.
Moderator. I'm Nico Van Summer, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Good Technology. Good's been around for about 18 years, building tools for allowing enterprises to access their enterprise data from mobile devices in various shapes and forms. And over that period, we've seen, of course, a huge transition. 18 years ago, mobile devices didn't look quite the same as they do now. Roger's keynote was very interesting, seeing the sorts of ways in which they're making use of mobile data in the field. And I think what's really important there is about we're using these devices to bring data that was historically hidden behind the firewall out to in front of our customer, in front of our partner, in front of our supplier, and mobilize that data. And that's how we get value from mobile devices. And that necessarily involves bringing data which has historically been of critical sensitivity and often is your business differentiator. If you're a bank or if you're a telco, in almost any industry, the data that you own is the differentiator between you and the next guy. And so securing that is critical. The mobile development process that we're seeing has been drawn in from the consumer world. Apps are built in enterprises in much the same way that apps get built in startups these days. It's a very fast cycle, very agile process where some guy has a great idea, let's pull some data from those 4 web services APIs and present it in an integrated way. The problem is that when we look at the platforms, the mobile platforms that are out there at the moment, they are very consumer-centric. And in many ways, this is good. They have glossy user interfaces, but it's bad from the security point of view. These platforms are almost leaky by design. They make it really easy to move data from one app to another, really easy to replicate data from one device to another, really easy to share data from one user to another. And if our platform inherently says, when I click on this image and press and hold, it says, do I want to send it to Facebook or Twitter? That's not going to be the right solution for an enterprise platform. So one of the biggest challenges, there are many, many challenges as we roll out mobility in enterprises. There's challenges about how do we make it cross-platform in an efficient way? How do we distribute the applications? The services frameworks that we apply to rapidly connect into our back-end systems are critical. But one of the biggest problems that we see in the market is how do we secure all of that, especially in a world where increasingly the device is not owned by the enterprise. I mean, certainly if you've got task workers in the field taking a tablet specifically designed for the job, then you can lock down the device. But in the IT industry, for our knowledge workers, increasingly the devices are not owned by the enterprise. And so we have to find ways to manage that data without necessarily managing that device.